Welcome back to today's episode of Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Intrieri from Peoria PD in Arizona. He has been in law enforcement for almost 31 years, started in 1995. His leadership philosophy is rooted in servant leadership. He prioritizes proactive mentorship and development for future leaders. Welcome to the show, Chief Intrieri. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me, Paige.
Of course, I'm really excited. I told you this offline, but anytime I can talk to someone from Arizona, my home state, it's really exciting. And I appreciate you coming on here and sharing some of the things you guys are doing organizationally. It's putting Arizona on the map.
Absolutely. I agree.
Give us a little bit of background. So, what was your life like growing up? What has your career looked like so far? Have 31 years flown by, or has it felt like 31 years?
Yeah, I hail from New York. Grew up on Long Island, not Long Island, but Long Island. I lived there for my first 25 years. I had a family, typical nuclear family, mom and dad, three kids. All three of us were adopted. So it was a very, your typical middle class family back in the day. My mom chased me around the house with wooden spoons. I had a sign in the assistant principal's office in elementary school that said my second home. I was an adventurous kid. I was a mischievous kid, but most of the issues that I got caught up in growing up were me looking after others. Whenever I spotted a bully, I took it upon myself. Rather than going to a teacher, I took it upon myself to deal with the issue. And I think for me, growing up in the house that I grew up in, and recognizing the effort my parents put in helping others outside the house through volunteer work and stuff like that, that put me in a position where I liked and felt very comfortable about serving, even though I couldn't really explain that. I think my actions demonstrated that, and what initially got me in trouble as a child propelled me into this career as I got older. I was, I went to college, and then throughout college and after college for a number of years, I worked in security, doing private security, dignitary protection, nightclubs in Manhattan that I ran the security for a number of years. And I worked with a lot of law enforcement or former law enforcement. And they always encouraged me to pursue the career path that I ended up doing so. And looking back on it, and it was a cold day in '94. I stepped in slush on a cold, wet winter day in New York, and I pretty much just had it. And it was that day I went back to the office, called Mesa PD, because my grandmother had moved to Mesa years earlier. And I said, "Hey, are you hiring? I need a change." And so that brought me out to Mesa in '95. And yes, it feels like that was yesterday. It feels like the 30 plus years. I can't believe it's going to be 31 years here in a couple of months, has gone by extremely fast. But I credit that to the fact that I've been extremely passionate about what I do. I mean, I firmly believe in what we do and why we're here, in helping those who can't help themselves.
Thank you. That was going to be my next question is, how do you keep that passion and love for the career, when there's obviously stress and hard times and burnout? How do you maintain that passion over a 31-year career?
Well, it's not something that's consistent. It really, and nothing in our lives ever can be. It's something that even in the best of relationships, there's ebbs and flows, ups and downs, and I think it comes down to really back to self-reflection about, hey, what is important and why am I here? I experienced while growing up, I saw a lot of things through my different pathways. I grew up in a very lower middle class neighborhood. So, I joke around and tell stories about depending on where I was at any given day, knowing I had to be home by a certain time, I had to kind of map out how I was going to get home. So to try to avoid having to pedal really fast
Mm,
because you had to worry about getting jumped or losing your bike or whatever else because the environment was so um, combative. It was so challenging. It was but I learned a lot from that, and I think my time doing that and the experiences I had working prior to law enforcement, I recognized that a lot of what we deal with is not normal.
mm,
We're not here to deal with the normal day-to-day stuff. And so we're here to deal with the abnormal stuff. And I think that coupled with what I call visualization, the preparation, the mental preparation, the emotional preparation for what you're dealing with, something I used to practice a lot early on as a patrol officer responding to calls for service, having the dispatchers in my ear telling me hey, these are the comments of the call, and visualizing myself responding in a multitude of ways before I actually got to the call. So I had almost like played out the scene in front of me.
mhm.
I think that helped prepare me for, in many cases, the worst. You would think about the worst things, and then when they don't materialize, it's almost a comfort to a certain degree. And when you finish up the call, um, it's a blessing. I think maintaining that realization through the self reflection about, hey, why am I doing this? What was this like? Um, that was a really difficult call, but this isn't normal, those types of things, and having those conversations, but also having somebody that you can share that information with and kind of rely on. I often say it to the recruits, it's important for you to stay focused in this career, but always have somebody you can lean on, whether it be a loved one, a good friend, preferably somebody that's not in the job, that you could share the stressors, not necessarily the details, because a lot of people can't deal with the details. And I think that's where we have a lot of folks that get into trouble. But share those stresses themselves, the things that really bother you, and then you're able to deal with the other parts of that moving forward.
Wow. Thank you so much. There's a few things I want to dive into. One is every single person I've ever asked that question to has a certain mindset. And
Mm-hmm.
it's this mindset of gratitude, a mindset of positivity, and everything that you just said displayed that. You're like, it's never going to be consistent. You understand that things are going to be hard, but you have this mindset and you're training yourself to be able to withstand the hard things. And I love that you were specific in talking about visualization, because visualization is mental training. And
Absolutely.
it doesn't have to be, when we talk about wellness, I think a lot of times everyone thinks of it in this reactive perspective. It's like, oh, I'm broken, or I'm struggling. And so, therefore now I need it, which of course, if you're struggling or, you need those things, we want to make sure that you have them. But we can be super proactive when it comes to wellness, especially as it pertains to performance and longevity. And so I used to do this. So I always make a joke that, my past life, I was a professional skydiver, because I was a professional skydiver. I'm retired. It was, something I did when I was really young, but I had found a lot of success in skydiving, and I was training military on how to be more advanced and do more advanced maneuvers in the sky. So we would do big military contracts. I worked with EOD, and what we did was visualization, and it was visualization for performance. And so I think that this plays into our success, because you're right. If you can visualize every single detail, and you can visualize yourself doing something right, but you can also prepare yourself for some of the challenges that you're going to see and understand, how am I going to respond if and when something like this does happen? It prepares ourselves for the future. And we don't always have to look at wellness as, something because we're struggling. We can look at wellness as a way to prepare ourselves to be even better and stronger for the future. So I love that you talked about mental training, because that is my wheelhouse. And
Right.
I think everyone I've asked that question to, it's this mindset, and it's this
Mm-hmm.
idea that we can't control a lot of things, but we can control the way that we respond, the way that we react to situations. And a lot of times when we find ourselves in those moments of stress or complacency, or maybe that burnout phase, where we tend to be kind of more in that negative loop and mindset, right? It's the times where we're training ourselves to be positive and to look forward that we can start that forward trajectory.
You were right. Yeah. No, I think when we talk about visualization, I didn't mention it before, but I was a soccer player, and I played in the Olympic development program. I played professionally for a few years. And that was kind of my thing that I did. And as I realized that wasn't going to be a future for me, that was really my kickstart to move towards a career in that. And ultimately, that's why I came in. But at that level in the Olympic development program, I learned back in the late 80s, early 90s about visualization, right? And imagining yourself on that field of play and coming up against an opponent, and depending on what the situation was, winning that battle, winning that challenge, getting to that ball first. That visualization, those skills that I learned, I then became a coach, and I taught that to my players, and I brought that to the job. And that was, instrumental for me. Even in the academy, I would do things like that. But you're right. That is a very important piece that I think has been missing within the law enforcement career. And this is what I am hoping to bring here to Peoria on the front end as we onboard employees and start to develop the resiliency of our employees. I talk with them about visualization and walk them through that. So that's becoming part of our training matrix here.
Yeah, I like it. And there's something that happens with visualization. So for anyone who doesn't know exactly how it works, for me at least, and you can tell me if you do things differently, but I would close my eyes. Right? I would take a moment, close my eyes, and I would picture every detail, every single thing. So for example, if we're talking about skydiving, I'll put it in my context, right?
Mm-hmm.
You visualize the light in the door going on. The light on the door is an indication for us to open the door, right? So the light goes on, you open the door. Then when the light turns green, you're spotting, right? Then you're focusing, like getting situated in the door for your exit. And what does that look like? What are your grips, right? And then there's a count to jump out. So it's every detail leading up to the very end, you landing safely on the ground, right?
Yep.
You can't rush through these things because every detail matters, right? Every detail that you're doing is going to get you to that end result, which for me was getting on the ground safely. We wanted to make sure that everyone got on the ground safely. And so what it does too is not only does it train your brain to be able to visualize success and the steps of, how to do things correctly, but it also forces you to slow down and be really present in the moment. And there's a level of breath control that is with that, right? You are slowing down your breath because you know that as you do these things, you have to be calm and collected, right? So it helps you to regulate your nervous system, lower your heart rate, your blood pressure, so that you are prepared and you can respond in the most effective way. If we're sitting there before game time, before that door goes on and I'm hyperventilating and I'm like, oh no, what do I do? Or like I'm stressed about it. How do you think I'm going to perform or I'm going to respond to that situation? It's probably not going to be like my A+ game, right? Like I'm probably going to be also trying to rush through these things and it's not going to be great. And so I think there's something really cool that happens in that moment where everything slows down and we start to feel more in control over what we're doing in that situation. And that I teach at, academies and pre-academies and things like that. And I always do this, and you can feel free to steal this, but I always do this exercise where I have them do something challenging. It's not like crazy, but it's something challenging where they're struggling a little bit. And I just have them do it, right? I'm like, do this. All right, let's try it, do it. Then on the second round, I talk about the importance of breath control and how breath control equals concentration. And so when you can control the breath, you can control, your mind, and then you can control your actions and reactions. So I give this whole speech about focusing on your breath. Then we do the other side. And I will tell you, it's 100x better when you see them start to slow down and really start to focus on that breath control and being like in that moment and regulating, and they come out and they're like, wow, that worked. And I'm like, yeah. And that applies to everything you do out there. It doesn't have to be just on the job, although it does apply to the job, but this applies to like when you're at home with your family. If your breath is
Right.
erratic, you're going to be erratic. And so, how
Mhm.
can we teach those skills in a proactive way? So now they know, when things are hard and they're feeling a little bit rattled, they have the tools.
Yeah. No, I remember trying to imagine what the grass smelled like,
Hmm.
smelling the grass, what the lights were like, because we play often at night and things like that. When I was playing and I would practice the visualization prior to a game, I often would imagine what it was like, the field conditions, the smell of the grass, what the lighting was like, um, if there was wind. Um, I often don't remember thinking about wind per se, but just understanding what that environment was like to get me in the mindset to be ready as I prepared for the game. As I transferred that over and started using that skill set in policing, assigned to the same area as a patrol officer is fairly common. So you become very familiar with the different addresses that you get dispatched to. So much so that when I would get dispatched to a call, I would immediately think, the obvious, the
Hmm.
physical signs, the type of brick, the way the brick was laid out, where the staircase was, where the windows were laid out on the structure, whether it be a residence or apartment complex, driveways, access points, lighting, again, lighting. And I would try to like visualize what that scene was going to look like as I came up. Was it going to be a quiet environment approaching the apartment number? Was I going to hear the disturbance as I exited the vehicle? I would try to envision all those different things to help prepare myself how I was going to respond. So I found that to be a very soothing exercise. And as I continued to do that, it almost like you talked about just before about things would just slow down. I used to explain to a lot of folks a lot of times that I felt the calm amidst the chaos because I almost felt as if I had already been there.
Mm.
Now I'm just making sure, checking my six, looking after those that are with me on the call, making sure we're taking care of A through Z and then back again. But I had already done it mentally in my mind in terms of how this was going to go down. And the call didn't always go the way I envisioned it, but the call, I was always prepared for a variety of situations. So I never took anything for granted.
Wow, I loved that statement. You found calm in the chaos because you had, in a way, already been there before.
Hmm.
That is so cool. Obviously, this is a part of the conversation in today's world, but wellness wasn't always a part of the conversation. And I know you've been doing this for a long time, but I would argue that for most agencies across the country, 20 years ago, if we would have walked in and started talking about visualization, people might throw us out the door because it's not something that was really talked about, back then. And so I'm curious how you have seen, this career impact other people's wellness, over the last 31 years that you've been in it. And how has that kind of shaped you as a leader in the things that you guys are doing today?
Right. Well, I'll tell you when I started, um, I was obviously familiar with visualization.
Mhm.
I was familiar with a lot of these exercises, breathing techniques, and things like that from the sports arena. At a high level, where you have these sports psychologists and physiologists that you work with that bring in all these things to play. When I started law enforcement, I was wondering why we haven't incorporated a lot of these things. And throughout my career, I I struggled with the concept of peer teams being the equivalent of a wellness program. To me, we were falling well short of what that mark was like. So, I was very conscientious about that. And as I moved throughout my career, from assignment to assignment, and as I promoted, I found myself taking more time to invest in the people around me. I talk about mentorship a lot because that was my methodology, is engagement, right? As the more I engage with my folks, the better I felt they got to know who I was. The better I got to know them, and it put us on a plane where they would be comfortable more so than had I not put myself out there to talk to me about some of their challenges and some of the issues. And I think for a lot of cops, a lot of people and I don't want to say just cops, because I think about the dispatchers, I think about the records clerks that have to redact the reports, I think about our forensic specialists that go out and work these scenes. Um, all of us collectively in the policing profession, um, what we are exposed to and the insecurities that we all have as human beings challenges us on whether or not we're willing to face it and really deal with it. And we do that when we're in a very comfortable setting. So I try to really create that comfortable environment with all the people that I work with. And, you know, I have 379 employees that I work for, 370 employees that I work for, that I'm here to support, and I'm here to try to make their worlds as best as I can make. And I think the idea of just creating an environment where they feel fulfilled, where they feel supported, and where they feel valued is a huge step from what I experienced growing up in my career, right? Yeah. We all had to, quote unquote, prove ourselves because we were rookies. So I think that's the important part. And I think for us to create an environment where new employees come on and they're onboarded, understanding that should be the expectation, not the exception, is my goal.
Yeah. So I didn't know that you were into sports and that you had played at such a high level before we talked. So this is new to me and it actually makes me really excited. And I'll tell you why. So before I worked with law enforcement, I trained professional athletes, and I've done a deep dive into how professional athletes train. And I do believe that you guys are professional tactical athletes. I draw a lot of parallels, and I know you keep saying teamwork. Like there's a lot of things that I think are very similar between athletics and the law enforcement profession. And I've done this and I've talked about this on the podcast because I think this is really interesting. I'll ask the question, how many of you agree that law enforcement officers are professional tactical athletes? And I did this in a room full of chiefs, and everyone rose their hand for the most part. It was like, everyone's like, yeah, like we would agree with that. And then I have walked into briefing rooms where I ask the officers, how many of you agree with this statement? And we won't get any hands in the air. And I'm like, that's very interesting that there's this disconnect between leadership and how they view their team and how the team views themselves. And I put out a couple examples. One of them's like maybe controversial because there's a debate between who the GOAT in the NBA is, but no one's ever debated me on the GOAT in football. So I always look at Tom Brady. Everyone's like, yep, we can agree that Tom Brady is one of the GOATs, right? And we take a look at how he trains. And a lot of it is exactly what we're talking about. He talks about mental training. He talks about, mobility and pliability for injury prevention. He talks about breathing techniques, visualization. All of these things are things that some of the greatest athletes of all times are doing. But then we go into this environment and we're like introducing these concepts and everyone's like, that's woo-woo, that's weird. Right. Like, what do you mean? And so, how do you think, or maybe what is your approach to, getting people to understand that this is for performance and to understand that, they are, in a sense, professional tactical athletes, and these are resources to help them with longevity and not necessarily, that like fluffy, and I've heard everything when I walk into rooms, but how do you maybe frame it so that people are accepting and they buy into these things and then they feel like they want to take advantage and they want to take action in their lives?
I tell you what, I have a really good frame of reference for that.
Okay.
There's a gentleman named Parrish Taylor that when I ran the training and wellness division in Mesa, he had reached out to me, and he is a developer of emotional intelligence programming. And he works with a variety of industries, but he really wanted to get into the public safety realm. And so we did some work with him on bringing in emotional intelligence into our assessment protocols for new hires. So it wasn't considered a criteria for hire, but once we hired a candidate through our hiring system, we then interviewed them and we put them through a series of questions to determine where their emotional intelligence was. This then allowed us to inform our training staff about each recruit and where their strengths and where their weaknesses were, so that the academy staff could then adjust based on the individual. With that, I learned from Parrish that he had also worked with the Navy SEALs. Mm-hmm. And when you hear terms emotional intelligence, right, a lot of cops would be like, oh, emotional intelligence, what's that? Like, that sounds so soft. Oh, really? Well, hey, the Navy SEALs don't think so. Yeah. And if they see the value in it, then you certainly can find value in it. And so I would frame it in that regard. And then I would talk about visualization and how I know they incorporate that in their trainings, and these different things. And so, these are things that we didn't bring into the profession until recently, maybe the last 5-7 years. It's really starting to take off. I go, and it's really kind of a shame, because we as a profession are so stuck on status quo. Mm-hmm. This mindset that, well, hey, this is how we've always done it. This is probably the last thing I ever want to hear out of any of my employees. You tell me this is how we've always done it, you're going to get our homework project. Because it's important for us to recognize that this opportunity that we have right now to reframe and reshape the profession is all about making sure you go home at night. It's all about making sure that not only do you go home at night, but the next day when you wake up refreshed, and you can come to work and say, I'm going to do better than I did the day before, and I'm going to help more than I could the day before, and I'm going to find fulfillment in what I do each and every day.
Yeah. Well, and that goes back to mindset that we were talking about before too. I laughed when you said this is how we've always done it, because of course we've all heard that before. And I think the rebuttal to that is, but what if we could do it better? It's like, what if it could be better? Wouldn't you? And my hope is that everyone is striving to improve themselves, and they want forward trajectory. I personally, and maybe, everyone has different experiences, but I have never personally met someone that's like, yeah, like, I don't want to ever get better. Like, I just want to, just stay here. And of course there are some people who are maybe stuck in their ways in certain parts, but I think that generally, if we actually were to have honest conversations, I think in general, everyone wants to improve and wants to get better in one way or another. And so when we say like, yeah, this is how I've always done it, I feel like we're not allowing ourselves to strive to do things even better. And right. I think that now, and I feel the push, and I'm sure that you do too. When I first started, everyone told me, cops don't do this. This will never be a part of our culture. If you want to volunteer for free, sure. Like, we'll let you come and do these things, but don't expect that it's going to be anything, long-term. And that was really the mentality. And I was like, okay, sure. Like, bet, let's go, let's try. And now, I've been in this space now for 8 years. And I've seen the evolution of it. And I think it's incredible. And I love that you keep coming back to the why. And I think we have to remind ourselves of those things. Why are we doing this? Like, why are we introducing these concepts? Why are we prioritizing wellness in the way that we are today? And you can tell me your opinion on this, but I keep coming back to the people. Mm-hmm. It's the people. We want to make sure that everyone is as safe and healthy and happy as we possibly can. And if you look at sports teams, the players are the most valuable asset.
Mm-hmm.
Protect the assets at all costs, and that is how I view, an organization. How do we protect the assets? Because your people are your most valuable assets. And I think if we have more of those conversations that are revolved around the why, and the why is strong enough, then the what and the how become easier.
Yeah. So I brought my personal motto that I I kind of fell upon about 15 years ago to the department. It's called passion, pride, purpose. And it kind of defines who we are, how we do business, and why we do what we do. And I think that's so important because, again, when you ask me the question, what makes you keep going? It's thinking about the passion that I have for helping others, the pride that we should all take in how we do the job, right? Ethical, with integrity, honest, forthcoming, but also how we present ourselves. And then the purpose, right? Yeah, again, protecting the vulnerable from harm, um, protecting life, preserving the peace, and protecting property. All those different things I think are so critical for our folks to understand. That is why we're here. And I tell a lot of people, hey, there would be no policing if there were no victims.
Mm.
So think of the victims as the ones, this is why we're here. But I need you to be the very best you can be so that you can be there for them because they need us.
Yeah.
And if you have ever had a good friend or somebody in desperate situations, or children, if you have children and they're injured, that's probably the worst feeling a parent can have is seeing your child be injured and you want to protect them. For police officers, for people that are in the policing profession, everybody we come across is there because they have a need and they can't help themselves. And so being able to put that in the front frame and reference of passion, pride, and purpose for me, and to share that now with the department and use that as kind of our motivation is so critically important for them to understand the why. Their health is important. Their mindset is important. Their physical well-being is important. And their sense of personal value is so critical.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. And I think that's going to be the title of the podcast, Passion, Pride, Purpose. And I agree with you. And I think that the more we can understand the why and remind ourselves of that,
Mm-hmm.
I think it helps us through some of the hardest moments in our life,
Mm-hmm.
because we're going to inevitably have them, right? There's going to be times where, and I can speak for myself, like there's definitely been times where I've questioned, I'm like, am I doing what I set out to do? Am I making the biggest impact that, I hoped for, and does the job love me as much as I love it? And,
Right.
And I think we all have those moments in life, and we all have ups and downs and have hard things. But I think it goes back to what we said before of, how do you find it in yourself to have resilience? How do you keep moving? How do you keep learning and growing and improving yourself?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the why is extremely important. I think that helps with intrinsic motivation. I think it helps with action, because if you don't have a connection to that, what is it for?
Right.
And I always encourage people to check in with themselves at certain parts of their life and career, because I think that those things can change sometimes. And I'll give you an example. So I've been doing this a while, and I've always asked this question, I'm like, what is your why when it comes to wellness? Why is it important for you? And the younger generation always says things that are different than the older generation, right? The younger generation, usually it's like they want to prove themselves, or maybe they have aspirations for advancement in their career, and, or certain assignments that they want to, get to as quickly as possible because they're so eager, to get there.
Right.
And then you have the older generation, I'll put that in quotes, but older generation that's like retirement focus, like laser focus. They're counting down the minutes and seconds to retirement and, planning for that. And then you have people who, are prioritizing their family, family's their why. And I've had a lot of reflection in my life of, what is my why? What is my personal why? What is my professional why for the things that I do? And it's always been for you guys, right? Like my why is always like, how can I show up for you guys in the best way possible? And I am expecting my first child, and I like my life, everything, and my why professionally is still you guys, but it puts things in perspective. You're like,
Mhm.
wow, like my why is this kid, like, wow, like that's crazy how things change, And so I think there's different parts in our lives and our careers where we can reassess. And I think our why stays the same for the most part, but our lens in which we see things changes, and there's different things that come up. And so, I don't think that I don't, how do I want to word this? I think that it's really cool to ask ourselves at different times in our lives, has it changed? What is my why today? And is that different than it was yesterday? So anyway,
Yeah.
I'll digress.
And it does change, and it should change based on your life. Those different paths. When I first moved out here, my why was because I wanted to forge a new path and have a new adventurous life, and I wanted to do things, and I wanted to help others. And then I met my wife, 3 years later, and we got married. And then I realized that I was no longer doing just for me; it was for her and for me. And then we had our first daughter, and then our second daughter, and then our son. And I drive to work sometimes, and I think about my why.
Mhm.
I never question what I'm doing, but I question whether or not I'm doing it as well as I can do it.
Yeah.
And I go to my why and I say, hey, if I were gone tomorrow, will they talk about me in a positive way that I put it all out there and that I represented my family? And would my family be proud of what I do? That is all I need to know. That's all I need to hear. Will my family be proud of me? So that drives much of my why today. With that being said, everything I do to ensure my family would be proud of me is about making sure my folks are taken care of, that we provide them with the best possible training, the support, that I am engaged with them as much as I can possibly be. Um, I had my administrative sergeant asked me this morning. I said, "Hey, I'm going into the office," and she's like, "Well, hey, boss, you gonna take some time off? Like, you've been working a lot lately." Well, this is how I make sure I take care of everybody else. My wife is working, my kids are grown, so I don't get to see them, and I couldn't see them if I wanted to see them right now. And my wife is at her job, so I don't want to sit at home, and I don't want to go hiking, I don't want to go four-wheeling without her. So the next best thing is, like I shared with you earlier before we started, I had an officer reach out to me, and it's his day off. I said, "Hey, I'll meet you today, absolutely." And we met, and I had a great conversation with him. That was my motivation, And I think for my why, my family would be proud to know I'm looking out, and I'm willing to meet an officer on my day off, on his day off, and make the time for him so he feels valued.
Yeah. Wow. I think the cutest thing I've ever heard on this podcast ever was, I don't want to go hiking or four wheeling without my wife. That was so nice. But yeah, I think it's, how do we show up for people
Right.
consistently? How do we show people that we care? And our time, I would argue, is our most valuable asset, right? We don't get our time back. And so whenever we can show people we care through our time and our efforts, I think it speaks volumes
Yep.
always, and I try not to take that for granted. When people come on here, like today, when you're talking to me for an hour, like I appreciate that because I know it's an hour that we'll never get back. So I think when we can appreciate people and the time that they give us, but then also be willing to give other people our time, not at your own detriment. You should definitely rest sometimes and,
Yeah.
take care of yourself. But I think that sometimes that speaks louder than, some of the other, bells and whistles that we give to people. Just our time.
I find joy in what I do. So it's the purpose.
Well, my final question for you, and I know you said mentorship is something that is really important to you, for that younger generation, for the men and women who are younger in their career, maybe for those who aspire to be in leadership one day. What words of wisdom would you share with them that, maybe you wish you would have known when you were younger?
Yeah, well, so I look at leadership multi-tiered. I see personal leadership as the foundation, right? You don't have to promote. You just try to be the best you can be. If you love what you're doing, you want to continue to do it, continue to evolve. Lead yourself in a direction where you're always growing, you're always challenging what's been presented to you, challenging that status quo, and be willing to change the expectations and change those parameters. From a promotional standpoint, mentorship standpoint, I've often said I loved being a beat cop. I was a detective. I loved doing that kind of work, that line level work. If I had great bosses, I never would have taken the test. And why is that? It's because there were some that I had some really good bosses, sergeants, lieutenants, commanders that looked after and provided me guidance. Believe it or not, I had more that didn't. And it was kind of like, well, you got to prove yourself kind of thing, kind of mindset. Or, hey, don't bother me. My first sergeant was, hey, don't bother me. You're calling me up. I'm having a cup of coffee. Okay. Yeah. 13 years later, when I got promoted lieutenant, and he was a lieutenant at that point, he said, well, you climbed the ladder pretty quick. And I said, well, somebody had to, because with guys running around like you, somebody's got to do the job the right way. And I let no bones about, I let him know. But I tell people all the time, I come to work and I think about this job, and I think about all of you, and I think about my goal here is to be the chief, be the best police chief that I never had. And so from a mentorship standpoint, I encourage people to seek guidance, seek somebody they can rely upon to share ideas. I do meet with a lot of folks and talk with them. But I talk to them about making sure you have a good partner, whether it's a spouse, a friend, somebody you can share ideas, lean on for those challenging times that you could grow from. But that the importance of our roles in the policing profession, whether you want to promote or not, is to look out for others. So if you want to promote, if you want to grow and you want to continue to move in that direction, make sure you need to put those people first before yourself. So if you're going to promote, you're going to become a sergeant, understand you work for those 6 or 8 officers. If you're going to become a supervisor, you work for those 6 or 8 employees. If you're going to be a lieutenant, you work for those 3 sergeants and those 20 plus officers. You're going to be a commander. That's why I say when you look at organizational charts, I always say they're upside down because they should be. In my organization, the biggest block should be on the bottom, and it should say chief of police. And everybody else should be able to grow from that, knowing that they have me as their foundation, supporting them moving forward. And that reflectively in each position of leadership, that they should think of it that same way.
Wow.
I'm here for them. They're not here for me.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you coming on here and talking about some of the things you guys are doing organizationally with wellness and your words of wisdom. So thank you.
Thanks for having me, Paige. Appreciate it.